heading back into the debt markets. That's where a lot of the conversations in 2017 had been, in particular, as the Buhari's administrations go borrowing from the global debt markets, the DCM, across this year. So we've done very decent amounts in Eurobond this year, and we've seen the government making one of the most strategic moves, not just listing these bonds, dollar-denominated bonds on the London Stock Exchange, but letting charity also translate to home, even though it doesn't start at home, but of course it gets home here. And that means listing the Euro bonds and the diaspora bond on the local securities exchanges. And that's what we got yesterday on the Nigerian Stock Exchange and the FMDQ OTC Securities Exchange, where we got a $3 billion Euro bond listed and another $500 million diaspora bond. So in total, we've seen close to $5 billion that the Buhari's administration have listed on the local securities exchanges in 2017, and that's quite a record. So we were there at the FMDQ OTC event yesterday, where Patience Oniha, who took over to the Debt Management Office in July this year, performed her first listing as the head of the Debt Office. And Channel's business producer, Temple Ashaju, had a very short interview with her to find out what this really means going forward and what to expect in the new year. Let's take a listen.
Okay, I think this is a major aspect of it, making liquidity available and at a good interest rate. Because really the issues were the corporates that may want to issue bonds, but the interest rates were too high because they were using the sovereign as a benchmark. So with the strategy we're running, already you can see from last week's auction, rates have come down because we repaid all the treasury bills maturing this month. We're paying the last one today. So initiative is liquidity and then lower interest rate. But that's as far as the DMO working alone is. The DMO is actually a very active participant in the Capital Market Committee of SEC and several committees of FMDQ. I personally have been a member of the FMDQ Debt Capital Market Committee for a number of years. Okay, so from there we come up with policies, with initiatives, and where we need to speak with regulators, whether they be the SEC or the CBN, we go collectively to make those representations, including under the umbrella of the financial system strategy. So whatever it is, because we're also on expanding markets. So there are several. I would say on the part of the DMO, again, under the Bond Market Steering Committee, of which we were secretariat. For instance, we're able to get tax-exempt status for all bonds, corporate bonds, bonds issued by multilaterals like the IFC and Development Bank. So there are things we have put in place. So it's that push that we're expecting.
I know there are some other bottlenecks. The federal state governor recently mentioned that the fact that you have to go to this bureau, from this bureau to this agency, are we looking at collapsing all of this for ease of transactions?
I think for ease of transactions, let me speak on the two regulators sort of in the market. There's the Nigerian Stock Exchange, there's the Securities and Exchange Commission. I know that going back several years, they've done a few things to reduce the cost for bond trading, because bonds are not equities and they typically trade large volumes. So if you put percentage rates on them, the cost will be very high. So I know that they both reduced their costs, their transaction costs. I know that the SEC issued new regulations, because before they had one regulation for equities and fixed income. So they issued a separate one for bonds. But in terms of state governments, I think your question is more about state governments, right? The process is not difficult. There's the Investment and Securities Act that prescribes word for word what they need if they want to issue bonds. Anybody who wants to issue bonds in Nigeria must go through the SEC, must go through the Nigerian Stock Exchange. I mean, that's how it is everywhere in the capitalist economy. On the part of government, because most of the state governments are borrowing on the basis of their FAC allocations, you know that, because they need to have an irrevocable standing payment order, which we call an ISPO. Because you want to make sure the bond is high quality, that they are able to retire at maturity, because you need to protect investors as well. Okay, they only work with two agencies, Ministry of Finance and DMO, because to get that ISPO, so that, I think they seem to have only two. DMO is part of the Federal Ministry of Finance. That's it.
Okay, so let's look a bit more into green bonds than Sukuk, that both seem to be targeting infrastructure. you were at one of the fora organized by the FMDQ sometimes in the course of the year, and we talked about disclosure rules and transparency. So that's on the part of issuers now, and that's for investors to be able to see clearly what their funds being used for. Are there plans to develop this, make it better as we enter 2018?
Okay, I think if we speak for the Sukuk, which is our real first test case of borrowing directly and saying these are the 10 projects. You know, with the other products that we use to raise money, FGN bonds, NTBs, it goes into the pool largely, funds infrastructure, of course, but in this case, the projects are targeted. So I would say those projects are clearly listed. They have been released to the press. And this Christmas, when you drive around, you see that those roads have been labeled Sukuk roads. So you will see a signage on them that says Sukuk. So we already have some feedback from people who are driving on that road to say, okay, they saw work going on here, that the road had been left unattended to. So people can monitor, independent people can monitor. And don't forget there's a trustee. There are two trustees actually, FBN trustees and STL trustees who represent the investors. So there's public information on the roads, and the roads have been labeled Sukuk. But you need to drive around Nigeria to see them. Okay.
That's part of the beginning, but a bit more forward-looking. What are the your plans for foreign borrowing next year, vis-a-vis the projections for domestic borrowings that you have set aside now to free up space for investment? In terms of foreign borrowing that you're going to be engaging more, can you give us a sense of what to be seeing?
Okay, I think really the DMO's new borrowings are determined by what is in the budget, because we borrow to fund the budget deficit. Then out of that, like we did this year, we can take a part and say this specific part we want to make it Sukuk or green bonds. Okay, so the medium-term expenditure framework has been passed by the National Assembly, and the budget for 2018 is the first year in that, but the National Assembly is presently reviewing the budget. So whatever it is that the National Assembly passes is what we would borrow. But as we speak, the document presented by the executive, the DMO is part of the executive, has about 1.75 trillion of new borrowing. And the way we have projected it is 50% domestic, 50% external. So external, you'll be looking probably at about 3 billion of new borrowing to fund the budget next year. There's still new borrowing as well. But when we say 3 billion or 2.5 external borrowing, again, depends on the final outcome. As you know, what happens to the budget, it goes through stages. But our external borrowing, apart from securities like this ones, Eurobonds and diaspora bonds, we still have multilateral credits and bilateral credits. So there's still World Bank facilities and sometimes bilateral loans. Okay, so like for this year, we had, I think, about 3.5 billion of new external borrowing. We've done 2.8 by way of securities. The others are coming from the World Bank and the African Development Bank.
But is there a way that the U.S. Fed rates will be hiked, or that's been hiked already, rather, will impact on the redeeming of all of these bonds?
We don't. We certainly don't think so. So rates are going up. We're operating in the market, so we rely on what our advisors say. But at a point, you need money, just like in any market. You have to take the price that the market offers. You can't be different. But that's why I made the point that it's not just commercial borrowing by way of securities. Our external borrowing also includes those concessional borrowings from the World Bank and other multilaterals. So it's a basket. Okay. In terms of redemption, I think after the exit from the Paris Club, we haven't defaulted on any borrowing. So that tells you there's a mechanism in place for servicing our debts. And the debt service number is a standalone line in the budget. So we do the projection. We're the ones managing the debt. So we do the projection and give it to the budget office of the Federation. So there's a line item, and all the parties responsible for implementing, including processing, we have a template, a checklist that we run with. Okay? No chance.